What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. It's Tuesday, April 3rd, 2018, getting into the week here. A lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And I'm going to start here with kind of a gut call here. I don't really have a reason to base this on. But just all of a sudden, it feels like the world has taken a bit of a step back from the war issue. We have Trump getting ready to talk with Putin. We have North Korea and South Korea making nice. China is still up in arms over Taiwan and everything. But it doesn't feel quite like we're on the precipice like it felt about a week ago. Doesn't mean we're still not in danger. But I think maybe we've got time to take a little bit of a deep breath and maybe people will start calming down here again. Now, getting into our domestic politics, back over to the FBI, the most recently revealed texts are starting to look like they're going to be a major, major scandal. And of course, we're talking about the text between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, which seem to implicate the White House in coordinating with this effort to try and gin up some kind of a collusion case against Donald Trump. And the reason this is significant is because the public position of the Obama White House was they were not involved at all with any of this. And so it looks like the Obama administration has been covering up their coordination with the FBI and with the CIA, and pressure is starting to build on White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, Senator Harry Reid, and the CIA's John Brennan. Now, getting back on over to the FBI, they're still reeling from that court decision down in Florida where the wife of the Pulse nightclub shooter was found not guilty on all counts. The government's entire case was based on the FBI's claim that she had signed a confession after somewhere between 11, 14 hours of highly coercive interrogation. And she finally signed a document supposedly written by the FBI itself. Now, this is a woman, let's be gentle on her. She's got an IQ of 84. And if you put enough pressure on somebody, eventually they'll sign anything. Remember how they got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to confess to being the mastermind of 9/11? They waterboarded him something like 150 times. And then made him listen while his kids were locked in metal boxes with biting insects. And the FBI doesn't have a good reputation. And the jury basically said that, no, we don't believe the FBI on this. Okay. We're under a flash flood watch, we've just been informed. And let's look at the FBI's performance. Even by federal government standards, they are incompetent. COINTELPRO, Richard Jewell, the Ruby Ridge Massacre, Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, the anthrax witch hunt, the forensic lab scandal, that was a biggie, and of course the Hillary cover-up. They really don't serve the American people in any kind of a useful capacity. They are the American version of the Gestapo, there to enforce the will of the rulers. Now, Devin Nunes is getting very, very angry with the Department of Justice because they keep requesting documents and the Department of Justice stalls or refuses. And it's almost like the Department of Justice has become weaponized against the truth getting out. It's become weaponized against political opposition. It's become weaponized against the American people. And so Nunes has now issued new subpoenas. And he's saying point blank, if the subpoena is not honored, he's going to move to contempt of Congress. And once he has contempt of Congress conviction, he's going to move to impeach. Impeachment is not just for members of Congress and the White House. Department of Justice officials can be impeached and removed by Congress. Now, over at Robert Mueller, he's still out there wasting time and money. He's gone way off the track of trying to prove any kind of collusion. He's now investigating a consulting firm with ties to Jared Kushner's Middle East policy point man. And they're now focusing on this meeting between a Trump campaign advisor and Blackwater founder Eric Prince and a Kremlin-linked banker on the Seychelles Islands in January of 2017. This was after Trump had won the election. Now, Eric Prince has said the meeting was just coincidental. The Times report is claiming Mueller is looking into whether Nader was there to help funnel money from Russia to Trump through the United Arab Emirates. It's a fishing expedition, and that's not the way special counsels are supposed to work. Special counsels are not supposed to be appointed until there is actual evidence obtained through normal Department of Justice investigation that something wrong has happened, some crime has been committed. Mueller's just out there fishing, and he's come up empty. Let's take a phone call. Larry in Indiana. Aloha, Larry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, it just seems like they're trying to do item after item after item to keep people distracted. I mean, I'm looking around and seeing some of the craziest things these days. I don't see why you don't do a topic on... I invite anybody to take a look at a Roman numeral clock these days and tell me if it looks like what you thought it did, even the real old ones on the courthouses. How does a Roman numeral IV change to a 1111 and all the B numbers turn upside down on almost every clock out there, Mike? Hundreds of things have changed in what we're calling our reality with this Mandela effect, and nobody's talking about it. Well, I know the Statue of Liberty wasn't on Liberty Island.
I happen to have a clock that uses the Roman numerals, and it looks like a normal clock to me, so I'm afraid...
Well, I invite you and everybody to look around, because I'm finding almost none of them the way they were. Even on eBay, out of hundreds, I found maybe 3 that were as they were. I mean, those Roman numerals were not upside down.
Larry, I got to tell you, I don't care how much of a rush you are in when you get up in the morning, you have got to stop drying your hair in the microwave oven because it's having an effect. So thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to the real world, there's an interesting article from Oraz.com, and I agree with what it's saying. Basically, there's a new study out showing that the current state of American polarization is less about a disagreement on the actual issues and more about a team sport mentality. I'm on the liberal team, therefore I will just fight liberal, and it doesn't matter what they're saying and how silly they get with men in the women's restroom. I'm a liberal, that's my team, go team, get the cheerleaders out there. And I agree. And part of that is because we have seen so many of these campaigns, especially Hillary's, running not on the issues and the platform and the policies, but as a personality cult. And liberalism shows all the signs of actually being a cult experience, to the same extent that Scientology is. And so this article is absolutely right. Most Americans aren't discussing the issues. They're not discussing the war. They're not discussing the realities about what happens with open borders. It's just out, my team is for open borders, and I'm going to fight that, and we will win, victory or death. Blood makes the grass grow, and so forth and so on. Now, over at Investment Watch blog, they basically came out with an article saying most of us really are sheep. Experiments in social compliance show few people argue with authority figures. Now, this is a look back at the Stanley Milgram experiments. And if you are not familiar with what I'm talking about, this was an experiment that was run by Yale University psychologist Stanley Milgram to try and figure out why so many people went along with the Nazi platform and Hitler, even though they knew in their heart of hearts it was wrong to do so. And he wrote a book in 1974, Obedience to Authority, detailing this experiment. And it was controversial, and it actually resulted in an episode on The Twilight Zone, starring a young William Shatner, and then more recently a movie that went into more depth about the experiment. And basically what it was is Stanley Milgram had these two volunteers come into this room, and they would do a coin toss where one would be the test subject and the other would be the testor. And the test subject would go into a booth and be wired up with electrodes, and the testor would sit at this little box which had these little buttons with voltage numbers on them, and he would ask a series of questions of the test subject, and every time the test subject answered wrong, the testor had to administer a shock. Now, it was all a setup. The guy in the booth, wired up to the electrodes, was part of the experimental team. The guy at the control box, that was the real test subject. And what Stanley Milgram found is that the vast majority of people, even though they were verbally saying, I don't like this, I don't like inflicting pain, would go on and just respond to the authority to say, you must complete this process, you must take it all the way to the end. And it is a very damning look into the heart of the human psyche, that we are predisposed to simply knuckle into an authority figure, even when we know in our heart of hearts it is wrong to do so. Now, over in Pennsylvania, there is a lawsuit being filed by the Public Interest Legal Foundation, where they have discovered something like at least 100,000 non-citizens registered to vote in Pennsylvania. And state officials are stonewalling requests for access to the data that could show how large the problem really is. So they filed a lawsuit in federal court in Harrisburg, arguing that Pennsylvania bureaucrats are concealing facts about non-citizens registering and voting. Now, he said that Pennsylvania admitted back in the 1990s there was a glitch that allowed non-citizens applying to renew driver's licenses to be offered the chance to register to vote. And Pilf just wants to find out how big the problem is. And Pennsylvania officials are simply stonewalling. And this Public Interest Law Foundation says they found the same problem in many other states. This is a scandal. Illegal immigrants are coming into this country. They're being lured here by Democratic promises of free stuff as long as they will vote Democratic. This is election fraud and immigration fraud on a massive, massive scale. And Trump had better do something about it, or he's going to lose the Congress in November, and he will lose the White House in 2020. And I, for one, cannot fathom his inaction on this. If I were sitting in that office, I would have fixing and overhauling the election system as one of my top priorities. Now, getting on over to the war zones, government forces have liberated 5 more settlements in the Rastan pocket. They established control of the town of Taxis and the villages of Zur Abadarda, Jamikila, Al-Mashia, Imara in the Rastan pocket in northern Homs. Now, these villages have been controlled by local militants under the influence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda. However, the Syrian Arab Army reached an understanding with the locals and was able to enter the area without any fighting. More and more of these U.S.-backed rebels are laying down their guns and accepting the amnesty and getting on out of there. And the elimination of these little pockets is an important part of the wider effort aimed at challenging other much bigger threats to the territorial integrity of Syria. So Assad is winning this war, and I want you to keep that in mind, because if the U.S. wants to escalate this war, and I know Donald Trump said we're leaving there, but we know that there's a lot of people around him who want to reverse that. So there may be another chemical weapons false flag in Syria. And remember, there's no reason for Assad to do something like that because he is already winning the war. And he knows that a chemical weapons attack will bring the United States back in. Now, oddly enough, over in Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman responded to Donald Trump's statement saying that he thinks the U.S. ought to stay in Syria and keep its military presence there. And bin Salman is starting to really throw his weight around in the Middle East. There'll be more about that later on. Now, it may be that the Saudi Crown Prince is realizing that Trump is intending for Saudi Arabia to come on in and sort of keep Syria in check, and maybe Saudi Arabia doesn't really want to do that. But it was an interesting comment for him to come on out and make, to say that he wants the U.S. to stay in Syria, which, again, we must remember. the United States does not have a legal right to be in Syria. And hang on a minute. I'm having a little technical issue here. I'm having a little issue with this machine. Okay, we're back. Now, there used to be a time a few years ago, in fact, during the first and second Iraq wars, where the U.S. military had this slogan, "We own the night." And that was because of our advanced third-generation night vision devices. Now, we're all familiar with night vision. You can go on out on eBay or Military Surplus, and you can buy a lot of the first-generation night vision scopes. But right now, the U.S. military are up to the third-generation night vision scopes. These are the ones that really can see clearly on an absolutely moonless night, just by the stars, even with a mild overcast. And they do not emit infrared as illuminators, so they don't give their positions away. They're very, very powerful tools. But apparently up in Afghanistan, the Taliban has acquired much of the same technology. They're either seizing it from slain Afghan troops who were equipped by the United States, or they simply buy it up on the black market, and there's a lot of it floating around. The Pentagon is aware of the program. They don't know how to fix it. And so these Taliban fighters who are now wearing night vision goggles have more than doubled nighttime attacks on Afghan and U.S. troops between 2014 and 2017. It's hard to keep that technology on one side or the other. And I have one of those old first-generation Russian night vision scopes. I got it when we were living in Washington State. I used to watch wildlife at night with it. But amazingly enough, the new generation of digital cameras see better in low light than those first-generation night vision scopes. Now, Lindsey Graham is out there. He's basically part of the Let's Get Russia bandwagon. And he's out there just with this venomous spiel against Russia, and saying that Russia is out of control and that the U.S. authorities are doing against the Russian side is no longer working. And he thinks Trump is not able to handle the Russian leadership. Now, Lindsey Graham is urging the White House to attempt total economic isolation of the Russian Federation. First of all, to deprive Moscow of energy buyers. This is to try and undermine the Nord Stream 2 project. And he cited the example of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan's policy toward the USSR in the 1980s. Remember when Reagan used to call them the evil empire? And Graham pointed out that every time the USSR tried to develop its military technology, Reagan would outstrip the enemy a step further, ultimately culminating in the Strategic Defense Initiative. There's only one small problem with that. During that whole period of Reagan-Bush military buildup, the U.S. went from being the world's largest creditor nation to the world's largest debtor nation, and we have never gotten out of that problem. So Lindsey Graham is like saying, yeah, sure, let's bankrupt the nation. Let's plunge it further into debt. It doesn't really matter as long as we get those gosh darn Russians. Well, Lindsey, if you really feel that way about it, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Mind your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Vladimir Putin and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But my money is on Putin to whip your ass, to be brutally honest about it. All right, we're going to take another phone call here. Lee in Nashville, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm just trying to see how we're supposed to take Trump as a good guy when he's still supporting Goldman Sachs, and he's still supporting ISIS, and he's still supporting doing a lot of the things that Obama did. Plus, take a look at Roman numeral clocks, folks. They have changed. Mandela effect. Look at them. Look at them. Look at them.
The funny thing is, up till he said the Roman numeral thing, yeah, Trump is a disappointment. And yeah, I supported him in the election, primarily to keep Hillary out of the White House. But I mean, Yeah, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And there's a breaking news story. Apparently, there have been gunshots fired at the YouTube headquarters building in San Bruno, California. And apparently, a product manager tweeted there's an active shooter on campus. The police department instructed people to stay away from the building. And employees first thought there'd been an earthquake, but they evacuated the building. And they're saying the shooter may have committed suicide. So no other details at this time. We'll stay on top of that story as well. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Andrew in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Thanks for having me. I agree with the last caller minus the minus the Roman numeral issue, whatever that is. I see that Trump is being hypocritical, I guess, when it comes to some of the things he said. But, for the most part, it does seem like he's a neocon and he's surrounded by neocons. That's just a label. I just think he's part of the system and he's happy to have power. And I hope, for the best. I hope that, hey, somewhere deep down inside, he's a constitutionalist. And he wants to restore sound money, but it sadly seems like, the war drums are beaten. Even if, like you said, it has died down a little bit the past week, but maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the way they usually have brought tyranny into America. So, I just wanted to, put my 2 cents out there that I don't have a lot of confidence in Trump at all.
No, I don't either.
Or ever.
The only way I will support Donald Trump in 2020 is if Hillary runs again. Other than that, I'm going to be looking elsewhere.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you, sir. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, this Skripal situation has been dragging on and dragging on and dragging on, and Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, is basically saying Great Britain is in a race to the bottom in terms of how they've been handling this entire situation, the propaganda, the warmongering, the absolute absence of any normal protocols of decency, or let's find out the facts before we rush to judgment. And he goes on to say they've really taken this too far, and I tend to agree. I think we're all on Skripal burnout, and it hasn't proved to be this global rallying cry against Russia that perhaps Theresa May hoped it would be, because there's a lot of dissension within her own government. There are many of the countries in the EU that are refusing to go along with the expulsion of the Russian diplomats. China has stepped into the fray and saying that Russia is owed an apology for being accused of this crime without any proof whatsoever. And it goes on to say that the West disregards due process. It's trying to bully Russia, but its failure to do so shows the West is no longer leading the world community, and in its desire to cling to power has actually become a threat to other nations. And that is absolutely, absolutely correct here. Now, Serbia has gone public saying that Great Britain is trying to put pressure on them to expel Russian diplomats from Belgrade. And Serbia is saying, no, we're not going along with that. Meanwhile, NATO is trying to use the Skripal case to sort of tighten the ranks ahead of the NATO alliance's summit, where the NATO leadership is going out to the NATO nations saying, we're going to be making some changes at the summit. We've all got to pull together. We've all got to put aside our differences. We've got to unite militarily because the Russians are coming, and the Skripal case proves it. They've got chemical weapons, and they're going to be painting it on all of our doorknobs unless we go and attack them. It's Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction all over again. And a giant monkey wrench just got thrown into this whole thing, because in response to demands by most of the world's governments that some kind of proof be provided that the Novichok used on the Skripals came from Russia, the British government gave samples to Portendown and said, find something in there that links to Russia, and Portendown came on back and said, We can't. There's nothing there. There's nothing here that says this came from Russia or was even made in Russia. It's anonymous. Well, so now the story has changed. According to an article in the Daily Beast, Britain is saying that, well, whoever tried to assassinate Skripal and his daughter, and wherever they got the Novichok, certainly they had Putin's approval. That's the new spin. Yes, maybe somebody else did it. Maybe the Novichok came from someplace else, but Putin had to know, and he had to approve. You got to be pretty gullible to buy into that one. Let's be very honest about that. You have to be about as gullible to believe that as to believe that the Roman numerals on the clocks are flipping upside down right about now. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we have a caller on the line as soon as we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call now from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, so, hey, Mike, crazy glue, when you touch it against your fingers, how long does it take to bond? About 10 seconds?
Yeah, it's really fast.
Well, Novichok, if it was on the doorknob, which it would have been, as soon as they reached the car, they would have been dead.
Yeah, that's how fast Novichok will work. And so this idea that they touched their doorknob and they didn't suffer the effects until 7 hours later, no, there's a big hole in the story.
Boris Johnson, Theresa May, the whole British government, they look like our government, a bunch of lying scumbag morons. Like, I feel sorry for the British people and the American people, not all of them, because, your listeners and people we know what's going on. But how can anybody believe this same crap? It's like after Iraq and Vietnam. I mean, how can you be this stupid to buy this crap?
I don't think anybody is buying it. I don't think anybody is buying it. I know the governments are responding to political pressure to go along with a certain agenda. But by and large, I'm not aware of hardly anybody who's believing any of this stuff anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable that the story, you notice it's getting kind of quiet with it now, though. You notice that? Because it served its purpose of demonizing Russia. That was, it's time to move on to a different story. And there's going to be plenty more where this came from. You know that, because this is like the never-ending story. It's like against Russia and China. Hey, Mike, did you watch any of I don't know if you had time to watch any of the conference between Putin and Erdogan?
No, I didn't.
I watched some. They pushed ahead the S-400.
Yes, they did.
Delivery.
Yes, I'd heard that secondhand.
So that means, Mike, that Turkey is on Russia's side. I mean,
I'm not sure about that. I think Turkey is kind of a wild card. They seem to be cozying up to this party, then that party, and I think Erdogan, especially ever since that failed coup d'etat, he's kind of a loose cannon on deck, and nobody's really sure what he's about. Now, one of the stories that is coming out from Zero Hedge is that when Trump is saying we're going to let somebody else take care of Syria, that might in fact be France, because France has been wanting to increase their military presence in Syria all along. And they have no more legal right to be there than the United States. But it risks a confrontation between France and Turkey, who are both members of NATO. So even as they're trying to use the Skripal case to bring NATO together, Syria is actually running the risk of having NATO break apart into two opposing factions.
I don't think France can take Turkey, because Turkey's over there and France ain't. It's going to be a hell of a lot harder to move their equipment in at that point. I might remember France. Syria used to be a colony of France. So this all started with France, Britain, and the United States were trying to get rid of Assad. A lot of people don't know that, but it had to do with oil pipelines, part of the story. And this goes back to what? Sarkozy, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of, even though Sarkozy and the following prime minister, just like Trump or Bush or the Clintons, you still have like a deep state in France You got a deep state in Britain. You got a deep state in the West. You know, but who knows where this is going to go? But yeah, Turkey's carving out a part of Syria. But I believe, Mike, is that they're on the side of the Russians after the coup with Gulen living in Pennsylvania, and you know, that whole shoot down with the Russian plane, that could have been, Mike, like a breakaway group like that tried to take over Turkey. You know, that could have been like, you know, a coup. It was part of the coup with shooting down the Russian plane. Erdogan might have not had nothing to do with that.
That's entirely possible, but you're right. Erdogan went into Syria basically saying we're just going after the Kurds, nothing to worry about. Now they've basically said that Afrin is now being governed by Turkish authority, and so yeah. Turkey has already carved off a piece of Syria for itself. It's a small piece, but I'm sure that Assad is not happy about that. Now, getting on back to something you said earlier, I think the reason this Skripal thing is starting to fade is not because it's the end of the propaganda cycle and it served its purpose. I think exactly the opposite. They're coming to understand they didn't get any traction with this. People just are not buying the propaganda any longer, and that's a good thing for people not to buy the propaganda. The downside is, of course, the next escalation step upward from that are outright false flag attacks.
You're right, Mike. Since this didn't work, the next operation will be substantially worse. You know, like to the point where, you know, how much further can you push, you know, the bear? You know what I mean, Mike? How much further can you poke the bear before it swaps you back with one swap? You know, not multiple swaps. It'd be one big swap, you know, and the world will feel it, you know. Hey, Mike, real quick, did you ever hear of something called the Phoenix program?
Yes, if it's the one I'm thinking of, it was the assassination program in Vietnam.
But do you think that, like, it also had to do with, like, propaganda, and do you think that's going on here now in this country? Like, they're using that program all over the world now, it seems, right?
Well, they have different programs and they have different code names. I think Operation Phoenix was in Vietnam. I'm sure they use different names because the whole idea is to keep all of this stuff compartmentalized, so you can't expose one operation and have it lead you to expose others. So it's all highly compartmentalized. There's no question propaganda is being used on the American people. It used to be illegal. They were doing it anyway. Now it's perfectly legal, and they've ramped it up even higher.
You know what's scary, though, Mike, about this whole thing? There's actually people that, I mean, it's just amazing how they can get so many people to follow these programs without asking any question. You know, that's what's scary.
Well, that goes back to Stanley Milgram. That goes back to Stanley Milgram.
They had people cutting people's heads off, putting them on sticks in villages to scare the villagers from going along with, you know, the rebellion against, you know, the undemocratic, you know, South Vietnam, because, you know, we had the puppet in there, the dictator, you know, and people was against that. That's what Vietnam was about. You know, we put a puppet in and everybody was starting to, most people like in Ho Chi Minh City, well, the South Vietnamese people was for the North. A lot of people don't know that. I mean, so
well,
they
remember
had to keep
the leader of South Vietnam was assassinated only a short while before John F. Kennedy himself.
Yeah, man, Mike, how sad, like, when you look at, like, what we are, Americans, you look what our government has done. Like,
yes.
It's a disgrace. Just, there's no morals. Like, it's like, no, they're not human beings. You know, it's like, I mean, we talk about communists killed this many people, that. Look in your own house, man. You know, look at our own house.
Absolutely.
And clean this crap up.
Absolutely.
You know?
We have no right to claim to be the moral leaders of the world until we get our own house in order. That's the ultimate hypocrisy of it all. Anyway, Dustin, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Yeah, so I've been gone for a while. I had open heart surgery, so I've been out of commission for a little bit.
Well, I was kind of wondering where you went. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling much better. You know, the thing is, the doctor don't like, but I stopped taking those statin medications because my feet were swelling up. I was always sick to my stomach and always had a bad taste in my mouth. Once I got rid of them, stopped taking the medication, starting taking natural, going back on a Cenobite, and I'm feeling much better now.
Well, they've pretty much decided statins don't actually do what they're supposed to do. Statins were supposed to slowly melt away the arterial plaque, and what they've discovered it does is it'll actually cause large chunks of it to fall off all at once, and those chunks will get stuck in some very inconvenient places. And I think that was how we lost my youngest brother, because he'd gone onto a health kick. He'd been heavy like I was, and he'd lost a lot of weight. He was hiking, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, you've got to be on statins." And he was on statins for about 3 months, and he suffered a stroke. And then about 4 months after that, he suffered a heart attack and died. And he was like 10 years younger than I was.
But anyway, getting on to my topic, even talking like some people in the hospital, now people in the checkout line.
Yes.
It's hard to say. Now, Russia's really getting picked on this time because, you looked at the doping scandal, an Olympian having a bronze medal strip that's curling that really has nothing to do with using strength in the Olympics and getting over this doping. And we're starting to figure out it's all selective enforcement. Then here in countries boycotting Russia for the World Cup game, and you got the diplomats being expelled. And and the thing is, and this is where I'm coming at. With Donald Trump sending military to the border, really making a stand on the border issue. Don't be surprised if our athletes are caught doping and our medals stripped too, because we ain't playing ball with the globalists anymore.
Yes. All right.
So I really think Russia got a bad rap.
Of course they got a bad rap. This thing was just absurd on the face of it. After the fall of the Soviet Union, everybody was buddy-buddy. The U.S. and Russia were doing business, and it was okay to be doing business with the Russians. And now, of course, retroactively, they're trying to demonize Donald Trump because his business empire was doing business in Russia. And you have to understand, it really is absurd. And when Putin took over direct control of Russia's central bank, that was pretty much when all of a sudden the West turned against him and just started going after him. And this whole thing with the Skripal case, yeah, it's Iraq all over again. Oh, we accuse Russia of having chemical weapons and assassinating people on our soil. And again, I don't think they're getting a lot of traction with it. They really aren't.
Well, the thing is, it even made a lot of people mad here too. It's like, when the Olympics happened, the Russians were not allowed to carry their own flag in the Olympics.
Yes.
And that's a real insult.
Especially when you realize in the original Olympics, the spirit of the original Olympics was the Olympics transcended nations and war and politics. In the ancient times, when the Olympics came around, armies would literally stop right where they were and put down their weapons and go do the games. And today, of course, the Olympics have become highly politicized. They've become another battleground. And I feel sorry for those athletes who are in the crosshairs, who are training their entire lives to go for the Olympics, and then all of a sudden some politician somewhere says, well, you can't go. Or the athletes from another country can't go. Or you can't march under your own flag. And I really feel sorry for those kids because they shouldn't be caught up in all of this. There are even allegations that some of these athletes who were suspended for doping may have been framed, that somebody tampered with their samples in order to basically get them out of the games. And this kind of dirty politics and dirty playing is so contrary to the spirit of the Olympics. They've really destroyed what the Olympics is supposed to stand for.
Well, you're confusing the athletes of doping, but I'm hearing like now the International Olympic Committee says now if you say you're a woman, you're actually a man, you can actually be on the ladies wrestling team, which I really think, and they're worried about doping. This is happening.
They actually said that. They actually said that?
Yeah. No, it's actually, the International Olympic Committee said, I read about it, said, if you say that you're a woman, you're actually a man, you can be on the women's wrestling team.
That is absurd.
It's a new,
You know something? I think we need 2 new cabinet positions in the White House. We need a secretary of decency. And most importantly, we need a secretary of common sense to get away from all of this. Or if you're going to say that men and women can compete in the same teams, start breaking it up into weight classes so that you don't have big hulking males competing against much smaller women. But to just say that men who self-identify as women can compete in the women's wrestling event, that's absurd. And it's cheating those women who are women, born women. They know they're women. They've trained very hard to win at the women's wrestling. And all of a sudden, there's this big hulking guy who's allowed to basically pound them into the mat because of political correctness.
Well, it's a sad thing. I'm going to send you that link of what the Olympic Committee said. But, going back to Russia, the thing is, Donald Trump should have did it early in his term when he got he should have ordered the arrest of people of Uranium-1. That would have shut down the Russian collusion big time.
He should have. He should have. I don't understand why nothing is being done about Uranium-1. There is so much evidence there. There's a huge amount of evidence, and Mueller's ignoring it. Sessions is ignoring it. The entire government is apparently being blackmailed by Hillary Clinton. They don't dare touch her or any of her cronies, and that is a cancer at the heart of our nation.
Well, personally, I think the FBI and the Department of Justice is so corrupt. I've been hearing rumors that we might have to use the military to sort of like gut the corruption out of the bureaucracy.
Well, worse things have happened. I mean, we could reach a point where the federal government is seen as so corrupt, there might be a military coup. And I wouldn't want to see that actually happen. But on the other hand, most of the military people that I know and are friendly with, they are strict constitutionalists.
Yes. And the thing is, like I say, that's how they should have, like I say, Uranium-1, that's where they should have went. And I don't care. The thing is, one thing I learned about in political warfare, type of warfare, and this is it, Mike, and that is keep your enemy off balance and don't let him regain balance. If Donald Trump would have kept Hillary and the Democratic Party and the globalists off balance with arresting Uranium-1 and arresting Hillary, and keeping them off balance because they don't expect nobody to retaliate. If you kept them off balance, the somber Hillary saying that she's got dirt on everybody, it probably wouldn't have been as big as she said it would be.
Well, Hillary has. Hang on, we're coming up on a commercial break. Hillary has got enough information to basically bring down the entire federal government, and that's why they're so terrified of her. That's the only thing that makes any sense at all. That's the only thing that would force Donald Trump to go along with this, because he doesn't want to be president of the country that collapsed. Anyway, George, thank you very much. Feel better, and we'll be back after this commercial break with more phone calls. Welcome back to our show here. We're trying to stay on top of this shooting up at YouTube headquarters. Apparently, there are some wounded. One young lady was apparently shot in the parking lot. A fellow employee used a bungee cord as a tourniquet, but the hospitals are saying there are multiple victims coming on in. Is this the latest gun grabber hoax? Maybe. Are they trying to build sympathy for YouTube and the corporate media, social media companies? Possibly. But it just seems a little too convenient. But we'll just let the story unfold and see what's happening here. All righty, let's go back to the phones. Ooh, my goodness, we have lots of callers. Daniel in Canada. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how can there be a shooting at the YouTube headquarters? It's a gun-free zone. Makes no sense.
Yeah, of course it's a gun-free zone.
This Skripal poisoning, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name.
Skripal.
Yeah. Like what you always said before, look what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive for Putin to do this, especially with the World Cup coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
I mean, what Skripal did happened years and years ago. There was no immediate pressing need to do anything about him. And Putin had the World Cup coming up. he had his election coming up. There was no reason for him to do something like that. And let's be honest, Skripal, because of what he had done, he had a lot of enemies. A lot of people wanted him silenced. And don't forget, he was tied up with Christopher Steele and this dodgy dossier that was trying to claim Donald Trump was engaged in kinky sex with prostitutes in Moscow. And maybe somebody wanted to silence him before he went public and said, look, it's all a hoax.
All these nations just falling in line like sheep. Canada's foreign minister said the reason they expelled Russian diplomats, besides the poisoning alleged, was because Russia was meddling in Canada's democracy. Now, if you can believe that one, I mean, that's sinking like the lowest of the low.
Well, we're getting that from all of that. That's a unified message. Russia is interfering with the rest of the world. And by golly, that's our job. Or at least that's what's coming from Washington, D.C. And yeah, it is the ultimate of hypocrisy for a nation that has U.S. Special Forces in something like 149 of the countries to be saying that Russia is interfering with the rest of the world, especially after Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya and Yemen and Somalia and all these other places.
Yeah, the timing is suspect with the Syria business and the fact that Russia just announced these hypersonic weapons that could pretty much eliminate the need for anything that NATO is building. So I don't know. It seems like NATO, they already decided they're going to war with Russia, and we're getting these details about. We're just getting primed for it. All right, I'll let you get on to your next callers. Thanks.
All right,
Mike.
thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think... That,
oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Mike, we're going to have to take a break for station identification. Stay on the line. I'll come right back to you after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to Mike in Chicago here, we're staying on top of the story about this shooting at the headquarters for YouTube. And the latest report is that apparently the shooting actually started outside the building at this outdoor cafe that's on the campus. Again, they're saying there are some wounded people. There are victims arriving at the hospital, and that's where we are right now. And they're treating it as an active shooter. There was that earlier report the shooter may have committed suicide. That has not been reported yet again. Always in these early stages of these things, there's a lot of information floating around here. But supposedly the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives have responded to the scene as well, along with the San Bruno police here. As a footnote, how did this one agency get alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives? It's just a bunch of bureaucrats that said, let's get drunk, smoke some cigars, go shooting, and blow some stuff up. Anyway, back to the phones here. Mike in Chicago, let's start over with you. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Great. Well, what I was saying, never let a crisis go to waste, Donald Rumsfeld, because we need a lot of race tags, in order to get what we want. But I'll get back to that in a second. What I was going to say was, if Trump wants to take care of the borders, why don't we do something with a little more common sense, like bring our troops home and stop these wars and save money that way, number one, and put them military bases on our borders, number one. And number
well, first
two,
of all, let me cut in here for a second. Trump is sending the U.S. military to the border to head off that caravan. We're going to be talking about that later in the show.
I heard that. Okay, I heard that today, and I didn't believe it until I hear it again. All right, number one. Number two, let's fix the economy. Let's print our own money. Let's have some type of a greenback, backed by by this confidence that we supposedly have. We don't have gold anymore. It's over. Okay, we don't need a Federal Reserve. We don't need a debt. Okay, we need a free market, and we don't need Bitcoin. Even though Bitcoin is a lot more freer because Bitcoin is not backed. It's backed by whatever price they come up with. But they don't have this debt problem that we have. And number three, take all of this bureaucratic nonsense. What do they call them in bills? Before they pass bills or they
Congress.
I forgot the name of it.
Congress.
yeah, take the pork out of the bills. You know, all the waste, the government waste. You know, take earmarks. Take all the earmarks. Take it all and help the homeless. Let's take care of the homeless problem, especially in the area probably where that Google shooting was. I would imagine, right? And somewhere in California, right? Was the Google shooting?
It's YouTube. It's YouTube. It's a few miles away from Google's headquarters. It's in San Bruno, California.
All right, there you go. All right, we're back to home base. I just ran a home run with my comment there. But
okay.
Yeah, never let a crisis go to waste. I'm sure that, you know, they got to grab all these guns before they start a war with Russia, because you know what? Nobody's going to want to go. Nobody wants to fight Russia. You know what I mean? This is just a way that they could probably wipe out the debt that we're never going to pay back, and kill us in the process. You know, because they got to get rid of a lot of us. There's too many of us. I always thought, you know, that's what their plan was. You know, is to eliminate a bunch of us. So that's their plan. But our plan is to say, no, we won't go. Right? And I hope it works out that way. So,
I certainly hope it works out that way as well. Anyway, Mike, we got a lot of callers waiting on the line, so thank you very much. We're going to let you go and switch over to Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy. I was taking cholesterol drugs, those statins, and my right calf froze up. And I had to ride around Dallas-Fort Worth in a wheelchair. I quit taking them, and the problem went away.
I'm not surprised. I mean, the American pharmaceutical industry, they're just pumping out all these newly made chemicals, these patentable molecules, and they just sell them with all of this very glitzy advertising. And then they work closely with public relations companies and even with the FDA and CDC to downplay the negative side of these medications, because it's all about making money. It's not about your health. It's not about what's best for you. I keep going on back to this situation we went through with Claire. It was many years ago, where all of a sudden she started developing this crippling joint pain. Had trouble walking, couldn't play her harp, couldn't play keyboard. And if you understood Claire's commitment to music, you would know what a tragedy that it was. And it was years. We were going to doctors, and they were giving her all kinds of medications. Some of it was off-label, special shoes, creams, and everything. Finally, we figured it out for ourselves what was going on. And that was that she was developing joint pain from exposure to what are called formaldehyde precursors in low-end cosmetics and household products. And once we banned those from our house, the problem went away. And not one of the doctors or orthopods or anything that she went to had even addressed the possibility that maybe there was something in the environment she was reacting to. It was always, oh, buy this, buy that, try some of that, try this, try. And it was all about pushing product. And that's really what the medical industrial complex is. All doctors are very highly trained sales representatives for big pharma.
Yeah. Hey, there's a book called Cholesterol Hoax. You ever seen that?
Yes, I have.
I saw it, but I got to buy it. Okay. Hey, I bet that was kind of hard for your wife to get that harp on her back.
Hey, no, I'm the one who lugs that around. Okay. I guess we lost Ken. Let's switch over to James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, Trump sending troops to the border, that fits in perfectly with what I was going to say. I was thinking, I know it's hard to keep all these new sweeping government powers that they're always enacting, keep them all in mind, but, you know, the United States is pretty much always legally in a state of emergency, and every new president pretty much rubber stamps it. But I thought when Trump first got elected that really, other than a civil war or revolutionary war, the only way to straighten things out would be if Trump took these emergency presidential powers that make him a virtual dictator, and he could do things then like take the heads of the Federal Reserve and all the other Bilderberg attendees and put them on public show trials and military tribunals and things like that. And then we could solve our problems rather quickly. The other thing, I had a little bone to pick with you about some of the advertising I've heard on RBN. I don't know if it signals a dramatic shift to the left, but every now and again I hear advertisements targeting homeowners, and yet I never hear a word about hetero owners. So.
Okay, that's funny. I like that.
All right. That's about all I had for you. So you take it easy and keep up the good work.
Thanks a lot. I will. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. And let's go back to the phones. And Steve Elkins. Steve, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, just some more lies from media. In our Orlando Sentinel today, an article they were talking about the Parkland shooting, and of course, Noor Salman was acquitted. Of course, we know the FBI really worked hard to try to convict her based on lies and fabricating evidence they didn't have. But it did say in the paper today, get this, it just mentioned it in one line. There was nothing to back it up to say it's truthful. They offered no proof. But they said Nicholas Cruz owns an AK-47. Well, if that were true, if I had my choice, and he had a choice, if he truly did have an AK-47, don't you think he might have used that instead of what he used, the AR-15?
It depends. I mean, I've had a chance to fire both weapons, and I kind of prefer the AR-15, mostly because of its modularity. You can be more flexible with configuring the AR-15 than you can with the AK. The AK sort of comes as it is, and there isn't that much that you can do to change it.
Now, is there a semi-automatic AK?
Yes.
47?
Yes, you can buy those at the gun store. They go for like.
It seemed to me they were kind of leaning to suggest that it was an automatic.
Well, they're trying to blur the line between truly automatic assault weapons and semi-automatic sporting weapons. And in fact, apparently the latest edition of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary now includes in the definition of assault rifle any military-style rifle that fires semi-automatically.
Yeah, okay, that's right. And when your last caller, a couple callers ago, you talked about this gender confusion, and they don't know what they are, and about how they infiltrate sports now. And, you know, a male could say, I feel like a female, and I want to participate on the female. They're going to destroy sports that way. But that brings me back to something I think it happened in the 70s, because I'm a tennis player, and I remember Renee Richards. I think that was the first person, the male transformation to a female, who actually played on the professional tennis, the WTA tour.
Yes.
That somebody actually did that. It was Renee Richards. I can't remember what his real name was, but he did go through the change and everything and dressed like a woman, but he was actually a male, and he played professional women's tennis. I remember that. So,
yes.
I hope we don't see that, because that's going to destroy sports altogether.
It absolutely is going to destroy sports. It destroys the spirit of what sports are supposed to be about, but then sports, like everything else, has now become a political playground. And I understand we're never going to be able to live in a world where where politics isn't present, but it shouldn't dominate absolutely everything in our lives. That's what it was like in the Soviet Union. The politics dominated everything. Every decision had to go through the political consideration. And there's a lot of life where that's really inappropriate, sports being one of them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, you know, the NBA is pretty colorful already, but could you imagine a couple of the guys in the NBA said, I want to play the women's league? How interesting, how funny that would be.
I think it's tragic. And again, it's unfair to the real biological women.
I agree. I know. I'll say this whole thing could just destroy sports altogether, totally destroy it.
This political correctness and gender fluidity, it's not just sports, it's literally destroying our entire society. And maybe that's by intention, to get us all so confused we don't know what's going on or who we are or what we're supposed to be doing. But our society does seem to be deteriorating right now, and almost descending from what it once was down to this increased hostility and fear, bordering on barbarism.
You know, Mike, if you ever look back, you know, your youth, did you ever theorize that we would ever be going in this direction? Did you ever, as a young man in your 20s, did you ever theorize that 30 or 40 years down the road we would be at this fork in the road, that we would be deciding, changing, you know, what is this and that, and black is not white, and I mean, this is totally blowing me away. These aren't interesting times; these are very bizarre times, and I wonder how much farther will this insanity be carried out? Because every year after year, we're seeing things we just thought we would never ever see. This is insanity. Bizarre.
It really is. And again, it's the sort of things that we see prior to the collapse of any civilization. And we saw it in ancient Rome. We saw it even in the Soviet Union. I really do still think that the ultimate destiny of the United States of America is a Soviet Union-style collapse. I think it would be the very best thing that could happen for the world and for the American people, is for our government to tear itself apart the way the Soviet Union did.
I would agree. And that's it, Mike. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. Okay. So far, the Stanford Healthcare confirms 4 to 5 patients from the shooting are being treated there. No word on conditions. Apparently, the shooting began at this outdoor cafe at the YouTube campus. So far, no reports of fatalities. Again, the situation with the shooter, him or herself, we don't know what's going on there. All right, getting on back to the news. Over in Belgrade, the opposition party, the Serbian Radical Party, is calling on Belgrade to give up its military neutrality and join the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a post-Soviet security bloc. Now, the call for this came in the wake of an arrest of a high-ranking Serbian official in Kosovo and mounting tensions in the region. So Kosovo is back in play, as it were. Now, the United States Air Defense Artillery Brigade begins a new European mission for the first time since the Cold War. In other words, the U.S. now has this anti-aircraft artillery brigade on station, on duty in Europe. They're arming up. Now, we know that the Cold War aspect of this is something the military-industrial complex has wanted for a very, very long time. When this former Soviet Union collapsed and our big, ugly enemy just evaporated like a soap bubble, the American people said, oh, wow, it's a peace dividend. We can start having the government spend more of our tax dollars on the American people and on the American infrastructure, on our schools and on our hospitals, on our quality of life, taking care of those disadvantaged and homeless in our culture. But of course, the owners of the military contractors didn't want that. They want that money to keep coming to them. The problem with being in the military business is you need there to be wars. And that's what Eisenhower warned us about. And so we know that getting into a new Cold War with a military peer is good for the military business. It's bad for everything else because all the wealth of the nation is being sucked out of all the non-military parts of our economy and poured all over the military, who are producing, frankly, a lot of very expensive junk. Now, over in Russia and Ukraine, there is another very obvious provocation. There's this Crimean fishing vessel, Nord, that was seized by Ukraine in the Azov Sea. And the 10 crew members on board are all citizens of Russia, and Ukraine is demanding that they renounce their Russian citizenship. Now, the ship owner is saying the vessel was detained unlawfully, and the actions of the Ukrainian border guards are dangerous for the life of the crew members. Now, the Office of the Federal Security Service of Crimea has filed a case under Article 211 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. But this is Ukraine, again, trying to provoke something, trying to restart that idea about Crimea. We've got to get Crimea away from Russia because Russia stole Crimea, which, of course, is the propaganda. It's not what actually happened. When the U.S.-backed coup d'etat overthrew Yanukovych and installed the puppet ruler Poroshenko, Crimea said, we want out of here, which is their right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They held a referendum, and 90% of the Crimeans voted to secede from Ukraine. Then they held a second referendum and said, we want to merge with the Russian republics. And that is what happened. But the position of the United States government is they don't recognize the right of the Crimean people to vote themselves independence, even though it's a right guaranteed under the United Nations. So by default, Russia stole Crimea. And as I said, this is like having a guest at a wedding decide that the bride didn't really have the right to marry the groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's the quality of thinking coming out of Washington, D.C. these days, which is why I think they're all on prescription antidepressants. Meanwhile, over in Yemen, a Saudi-led airstrike destroyed a house where already displaced civilians from other provinces were settled. In other words, they hit a refugee center, killing 12 civilians, including 7 children. Now, Yemen is starting to fight back. Yemeni forces targeted a Saudi military base in Asr with a ballistic missile, and apparently they hit it. It is a domestically produced missile called the Badr-1. So already those people are going to say, Iran is behind this, Iran is behind this, the rug has been pulled out from under them. Yemen is building this themselves. And apparently they inflicted a lot of damage there. The Yemenites have also targeted a Saudi oil tanker in the Red Sea. They were thwarted by the vessel's escorts, but they did inflict some damage on the Saudi oil tanker. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break. We're going to take a few minutes away here. Going to keep an eye on the YouTube story, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And once more, RBN does need your help. We're in a war with a corrupted government, a corrupted corporate media, who basically don't follow any rules, don't follow the laws. Their ethics is win at all costs. The ends justify the means. They're true believers. They serve a higher purpose, which may be war with Russia, and we have to stand up to them, and we need your help to do it. If you would like to send a check or money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, the postal address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to call on in and become a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Now, getting on back to the YouTube shooting, there is still no word on the shooter, although there is one report, it may have actually been a female. And apparently there was some kind of a joint luncheon between Google personnel and YouTube personnel at that outdoor cafe. So we'll see what's going to be happening with that. But supposedly President Trump has been briefed, and I'm sure he's already writing a speech. And the gun grabbers are, of course, already out there having orgasms and saying, we got another one, we got another one, we can grab the guns, we can grab the guns. And all I can say is, what a shame that none of those people at YouTube were carrying their own weapon. It is a gun-free zone, and that is the problem. When somebody gets it into their head that they want to go and shoot somebody, they walk into these places knowing nobody will shoot back. If we did away with the gun-free zones, somebody gets it into their head, I want to go out and I want to start shooting, and they walk up to a place like a shopping mall or Google or YouTube or school or whatever, and they start to remember, there are probably about 20 or 30 people in there carrying guns. They might just decide to go do something else. The purpose of having an armed population is not to have shootouts in the street, but to discourage shootouts in general. And let's be honest, look at everything the gun grabbers have done over the last several years, tightening restrictions on guns for law-abiding citizens. It hasn't solved the problem one little tiny bit. The gun grabber agenda isn't working for the American people. It's only working for the dictatorship. And I think this next story illustrates the situation perfectly. Apparently, thousands of women and children gathered in Sana'a in Yemen to show their anger against the Saudi Arabian coalition following the raping of a Yemeni girl by a soldier of the Saudi Arabian-led coalition. What was interesting is all these women were carrying guns. And that is the reason Saudi Arabia has not been able to go into Yemen and just take it on over and place it back under U.S. puppet rule. Those are armed people. And they're very tough. Now, down in Israel, the violence is continuing there. Reports coming out of the Gaza hospitals say that looking at the wounds on the victims of the Israeli snipers, they're intentionally shooting to kill or cause disability. They're either targeting center mass, center chest, or they're going for like the joints. They're deliberately trying to hit knees and elbows. Right now, according to an article in the Global Research, basically they're renaming the Israeli military force the Israel Massacre Forces. And that's exactly what it was. Remember, before this Land Day demonstration had even started, Israel sent 100 snipers to the border. They were there ready to start shooting. And basically, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights is saying Israeli soldiers killed or wounded peaceful Gaza demonstrators, including women and children who were threatening no one. This is a high crime. It demands accountability. And the reality is that this killing of the Palestinian protesters has turned into a public relations nightmare for Israel. Now, Israel is still out there saying that they were rioting, there was a threat to their borders, and they were justified. And by the way, not that many people were wounded. And the media, corporate media at least, is echoing the Israeli official position. So the media lies while Palestinians die, and they're not getting any traction with that. Sinclair Broadcasting Group Executive Chairman David Smith has basically lashed out at the media, saying it's so left-wing as to be meaningless dribble that has no credibility. And that's absolutely true. And that's why they're not getting the traction. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials again. And we'll be back with a phone call and more about the YouTube shooting after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And following up on the shooting at YouTube headquarters, we're now getting confirmation that in this case, the shooter was a woman. And apparently the shooting victims, there are 5 of them. And one man and the rest are women. The man is in critical condition. The others are wounded much less so. But again, as much as I'm able to ascertain, because I'm having to look at the closed captioning in between doing the show, but that seems to be what happened there. We now have a female mass shooter, so this idea that it's only these white males who go out and do this, that is now shattered. Let's go back to the phones here. Curtis in Nevada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I'm going back to that. You were mentioning that team picking my side, right or wrong type of mentality.
Yes.
I think that's normal. That's natural. I did that with my sports team when I was a kid. But the difference was, I think most people, they, if you point out to them something about your side that's wrong, and the smoking gun, okay, then you can rationalize and debate. Whereas nowadays, in this generation, you don't no longer see that. They don't want to debate. They just want to squash you if you don't go along with them.
Well, you see,
and I think the biggest reason.
Yeah, I can understand that attitude in team sports. That's how you build a sports team. But we're not talking about sports here. We're talking about a population getting together and through careful debate, charting the best possible course for the nation and its people into the future. And it shouldn't be turned into a sporting event. And that is the real danger. It's the path to fanaticism. And when you get polarized to the point of fanaticism, nothing gets solved, nothing gets resolved. It's impossible to find peace. You basically start turning, and you're on the path to a civil war.
Right. Well, we saw that, like, for example, when Hitler was able to convince his Germans, and the guy was so charismatic that he drove them over a cliff. But when they were pointed out to how wrong they were, the people were ashamed. The people knew that they were wrong. But my point is that nowadays, that I think that the younger generation, they don't have this ability to feel the same type of natural remorse or conscience. Because I honestly believe, I mean, I don't have proof, but this educational system used a form of a technique, a mind control technique from the time they were 4 to override or replace that natural instinctive value system. Like, that in the pedophilia world, they use like an extreme technique in which they get to the kid at 4 and that kid develops like a split personality. They can actually use this person as a future Manchurian candidate because the personality that was traumatized is the one that they can manipulate, and the one that wasn't doesn't remember. This is what I heard. This is an extreme form of technique, but I'm thinking that from the time any kid that went to public schools from say 1975 on, that their value system was replaced with more of the social justice system.
Okay, well,
So
Curtis.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, we're not born with values. We're born with certain instincts, among which are instincts of self-defense, procreation, and in the higher life forms, altruism, the desire to basically get along with others of our own kind. Values are something that are instilled from outside, and you're absolutely correct. Those who wish to shape society get to the children when they're very, very young, when they're too young to understand that the big people are full of it, and they will basically instill beliefs, whether that's Sunday school or kindergarten or anybody else, including pedophiles. And as the child grows into adulthood, their personality grows up around those core beliefs, and it shapes their behavior. And they will very often live their entire lives based on those core beliefs. If you take a small child and you raise them to think that they are unique and elite, and that the rest of the world is theirs for the taking, and that everybody should give them wealth and privilege, they're going to grow into adults who believe that to be an absolute fact of life. And there's nothing new about that. That was what led to the Prussian model of public education, where Prussia wanted to get the kids away from the parents at a young age and turn them into adults who were far more useful and supportive of the government. And that is the basis of the whole public education system. I don't think you need to go to the depths of saying that people are schizophrenic or Manchurian candidates. That's kind of getting into the science fiction aspect of it. But yeah, if you get a child young enough, you can raise them into being pretty much any kind of an adult you would like. Look what Pol Pot did with the children in Cambodia, turn them into executioners.
Well, yeah, that's a part of the technique. But the point being, Mike, is that what are we going to do about the next 5 to 10 years when these people are going to be the source of the population? I mean, all they have to do is wait, and they can vote themselves out of Second Amendment, all that, and then that's it. We're going to be done. What are we going to do? Is there some kind of way to undo this? I don't know.
Well, again, I keep saying that I think that the current U.S. government and economy are in a process of self-destruction. I mean, they're holding the economy together with Post-it notes and Velcro at this point. That's how bad it really is. And one of the main reasons I do not encourage civil unrest or revolution is that I really do think that the future of the United States is a Soviet Union-style collapse. And what we have to be focused on is being prepared to get through that collapse, take care of each other, rebuild our real-world social networks, and start planning for the kind of a nation we want to have after it's all come and gone.
Well, okay, that's where we disagree. I think that once we're down, I think the rest of the world is going to gang tackle us because I really don't see them waiting for us to recoup.
Well, again, go back to the Soviet Union. When it collapsed, the world did not attack them.
they didn't have blue helmets stationed all over the damn country and everybody else wanting to come in on us at the time either. Well, I mean, the Democrats themselves want us down. They're already waiting for, waiting to take orders from the UN. It was set up for this. The whole Russian thing, it's different. It's not the same situation. So,
well, I think the similarities is there. Yes, there are a lot of people who do not like the United States and want to see it come on down, but that was certainly true of the Soviet Union when they fell apart. And so I understand the globalists want us all under a one world government, but that agenda is in serious trouble. There's major pushback against it in Europe. There's major pushback against it here in the United States. Their propaganda about what a wonderful world, a one world government would be, has been totally destroyed by the violence and crime that the refugees have brought into Europe and the illegal immigrants have brought into the United States of America. People aren't just watching TV and thinking that represents the world anymore. They're stepping outside their homes, they're putting down their electronic devices, and they're looking at the world with their own eyes, and they're seeing what really is. And that is probably the biggest weakness of the liberal establishment. They're caught up in their ideals and their fantasies about what the world could be, and they don't consider the real world impact of what they're trying to do. And that's why so many of the liberal agendas blow up in their faces.
Yeah, that's true. People are waking up. I agree with that. But the people that aren't waking up are the ones that are going to be in charge in the next 5 to 10 years. That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, again, I think that when the federal government collapses and the American people are having to deal with that hardship, they are definitely not going to look on that political class with any degree of sympathy. And as we start to form a new nation, all of those old guard politicians are going to be persona non grata. And we're going to go back to selecting leaders who are ordinary people like us, carpenters, teachers, doctors, engineers, and so forth, rather than a permanent ruling class of hereditary politicians. Anyway, Curtis, got to let you go. Got other phone calls waiting on the line. We're going to switch over to Don in Iowa. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I want to make a comment about the Second Amendment, but first, there's one thing that's always bothered me about that one commercial you read on the commercials, and you say the left with veracity. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Left with what word is that exactly? Because veracity, V-E-R-A-C-I-T-I, means truthfulness. If you mean voracity, that means gluttony, but that would make a little bit more sense if you meant gluttony. But I don't know what. I think maybe they mean alacrity.
I think maybe you may be right, but Michael Herzog wrote that, and I think it's his voice that says that particular sentence, and it may have been a misuse of the word. But the context should tell you what was intended.
Yeah, I understand what was intended, right? As far as the Second Amendment, it just always bugged me, because I heard that commercial so many times, and I didn't know what the deal was. The Second Amendment, you're right, America is like in limbo because there's some places with a gun-free zone, and that's where the criminals go, invariably.
Yes.
They don't come to my town here in Iowa. We have, because there's probably 3 times as many guns as there are people in my town, we don't have crime. I asked one of the old-timers around here, what's the murder rate in my county? He told me about a half. There's like one murder every 2 years in my county. So, and it's because people have guns and they keep them loaded and they're ready for whatever. And one thing I always liked, I saw one of those. It was like a mobile. I was at looking at a house shopping, and then somebody else's house, and he had a mobile there, a gun, like hanging from a piece of string or something, and on the gun it says, "We don't call 911." I thought it was pretty cool.
Yes.
So finally, at my place here, I got because I go target shooting once in a while, and I got one of those silhouette targets where I actually hit the black. I think almost probably every time. I was getting pretty close to the middle, and then I just wrote on that, "We don't call 911," and I pasted it on my. It's a pretty big little sign. Pasted it on the on one of the windows. So if anybody wants to burglarize my place, at least they'll see that, and it might make them think a little bit.
Well, I remember when Claire and I were living out in Kaonohi, we got burglarized. And so I got a sticker that basically said, armed homeowner, which was a bluff. And I put it up there in the window, and I got a nasty note from the Homeowners Association saying, you got to take that down.
Right. Well, I don't have a homeowners association out here. I'm way out in the country, and everybody's got, most of them have more guns than I do, and I got 4.
I mean, anybody who looks at the numbers, the more the law-abiding population is armed, the lower crime will be. And again, look at the situation on YouTube. And by the way, the latest report is it was a female shooter who shot herself and committed suicide after it was all over. And she walked onto that campus with her gun, knowing there was nobody there who could shoot back at her. So, again, this underscores the failure of the gun grabber agenda in the context of actually making us safer. Now, if 20 of those people at YouTube had been carrying, especially carrying concealed, so it's difficult to know who's got a gun and who doesn't, that lady probably wouldn't have showed up. And by the way, I want to know if she was on prescription antidepressants.
Right. They're not going to invade InfoWars because Alex Jones makes everybody have a gun. Well,
that's one thing I agree with Alex Jones on.
Right. Okay, Mark, I'm going to let you go. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Dennis in Florida. Aloha, Dennis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Yeah, you just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to give you an update on a shooting. KSL.com, ABC affiliate, is streaming everything live, which is amazing because it's on YouTube, right? When I did a YouTube search, it didn't come up, so I get their parameters for gun-related violence is working. Anyway, the show that Mike Herzog had on yesterday detailed the statistics for death in the United States, and I think it was 0.00925 was due to gun-related deaths, and 65% of that, 66% of that, I believe, was suicide. Well, you're looking at the situation here, and a female shooter. They got an FBI talking head, law enforcement contributor to ABC News, saying this is very unusual. It's a woman shooter. We've detailed this. We've studied this. It's usually men in 100% of the cases. Well, you're winding up. Obviously, that man has never been married. Point number 2, if you're looking at the initial reports of the people who were shot, and I'm trying not to make too much joke out of it because it is serious, but you've got 2 women they found and 1 man in the beginning, okay? And then we found out that one of the females was dead, possibly self-inflicted. So I would say it looks like a lover's triangle here, you know?
Yeah, I'm starting to think that myself.
Yeah. Let's YouTube. There's a lot of stuff that goes on inside. You've been to one of those office parties at Christmas time. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I just.
You're right here. But have you seen that video? It's also on YouTube of these people just goofing around with a gun, and the girl accidentally shoots the guy next to her with the gun. And this is why we have to teach gun safety in the schools, because obviously these people were able to obtain guns and they don't know the proper way to handle them. They're treating it like it's a toy, and they're out there joking around with it, and nobody's ever taught them there is a proper and safe way to handle a gun, and it is not a toy, and don't you dare treat it that way.
Mike, remember the rifle clubs? In school, in high school, and junior high school, you could belong to a rifle club.
Yeah.
Do target shooting, and like you say, people must be listening to this, to to the broadcast here and saying, what do you mean they were bringing guns to school? Well, they were on the school to bring it to rifle club, and that was normal existence.
That's right. There were shooting clubs. There were shooting clubs. We were taught gun safety in school, and we never had any of these mass shootings. Anyway, Dennis, I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to our show. And apparently, yes, it was a love triangle. The Daily Mail, believe it or not, is reporting that this woman shot her boyfriend and that herself. And apparently the other people who were wounded were just catching shrapnel. And the boyfriend is in critical condition. My question is, was this woman on prescription antidepressants? Now, getting on back to the situation over there in Israel, there is a top Israeli radio host, Kobe Medan, who basically went on a broadcast following last Friday's Passover massacre, saying he's ashamed to be Israeli. And now he's been taken off the air, and he may lose his job permanently, because Israel just does not tolerate any criticism or comment, even from Israelis. There's been yet another conflict. Again, Palestinians are peacefully marching along the border with Gaza, demanding their right of return that was promised at the creation of Israel. And apparently they were fired on again by the Israelis, and 12 Palestinians were wounded, no fatalities. Now, yesterday, late in the day, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia came on out and said that Israel has a right to have its own land. And everybody said, oh boy, he's sucking up to Israel. Then he turned around and he did something which has actually moved him up a little in my esteem. He came on out and he said, Palestine has a right to their own land. And then he followed up by saying that this proposed cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Israel is dependent on Israel reaching some kind of an agreement with the Palestinians. And I have to applaud Crown Prince bin Salman for that one. And as I said earlier in the show, he's starting to throw his weight around the Mideast quite a bit. Meanwhile, up in Iran, their foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, is saying that Iran will not compromise on the Palestinian issue because it sees the Palestinian problems caused by Israel as its own. That if they yield on Palestine, it's only a matter of time before they're suffering the same fate at the hands of Israel. Iran has also come on out and reiterated that Israel must be forced to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty and to allow IAEA inspections. And that is a very sore point. Now, we know that Israel does have nuclear weapons. They have a secret, well, it's not really all that secret. There was even a TV show on Israeli TV about it. They have a bomb factory underneath that reactor at Dimona. And that was leaked to the world years ago by Mordecai Vanunu, who took pictures of the bomb factory and leaked them to the British press. There's also further proof in the documentation that surfaced after the fall of the former government of South Africa that Israel was trying to sell a clandestine nuclear weapon to South Africa. And who knows who else Israel has approached with that same deal. So Israel has nuclear weapons. That is a fact. Israel still maintains their policy of nuclear ambiguity. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. That's their official position. And one of the reasons they do that is because of all this money they get from the United States. And I'll explain why that's an issue after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And again, we're staying on top of the YouTube shooting, and it does look like it was an affair of the heart. The woman apparently shot her boyfriend and then killed herself, and some other people were wounded in the crossfire. The man is in critical condition at the hospital. She's dead. The others are much less seriously wounded, and that seems to be what that is all about. Now, getting on back to what I was talking about before the station identification, Israel maintains a policy of nuclear ambiguity. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. And the reason they do that has to do with all of the money they get from the United States of America, because there are numerous laws in the United States laws, that say the U.S. government cannot give any financial aid to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and to allow IAEA inspections. And that's Israel. Israel refuses to sign the NPT. They refuse IAEA inspections. We know they're trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to other countries, which is the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is designed to prevent. In other words, Israel is using the Non-Proliferation Treaty to create a market monopoly where if somebody wants a nuclear bomb, they have to go to Israel and pay Israel's price for it. Now, interesting little story. This is out of Russia Today. Beijing has sent a delegation to Russia to basically show Washington the unity of Russian and Chinese military forces and to support Russia at the 7th Moscow Conference on International Security. Chinese Defense Minister Wei Fenghe voiced strong support for Russia during the talks with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Shoigu. While stressing the united position in the international arena, the minister said that one of the main goals of the visit was to send a message to Western powers. In other words, they basically just said, if there's a global war, the United States will be fighting Russia and China together. Only just yesterday, Russia and China announced that they were going to link their satellite tracking systems into one unified system to see what is on up there. I'll tell you the first sign that the world war is happening, we're going to see surveillance satellites start to drop out of orbit. And then we're going to be back to fighting World War III with World War II radar technology. Now, Taiwan and China are sparring with each other. Apparently, the premier of Taiwan made some comments about independence, and the state-run newspaper in China said it's time to issue an international arrest warrant for Taiwan's premier for daring to talk about independence. So that's still a flashpoint, as it were. Somebody wrote an interesting article over in shtfplan.com talking about Oceania, 'Tis for Thee, the world of 1984 forming now. And it is showing the amazing parallels between George Orwell's 1984 and the world today, where in 1984, the world is basically three power blocks. There is Oceania, which is a combined United States and Great Britain. The two other superpowers are Eurasia and East Asia. And the other lands rich in resources were constantly changing ownership, going on back and forth. And alliances in the three-way war kept changing. Remember, partway through the book, all of a sudden, we're no longer at war with East Asia, we're at war with Eurasia. East Asia has always been our friends. And I would like to remind everybody that George Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning, not as an instruction manual. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I wanted to remind everybody that Russia was our ally in World War II.
Yes.
And Russia played a very important role in protecting the American colonies during the war against the tyranny of the crown, because the Russians sent out their fleet and intercepted other European Union actors that were intending to join in on the North American land.
You're confusing you're confusing the American Revolution with the Civil War. But yes, during the Civil War, Russia did send Russian warships to keep other nations away from our coastlines.
Okay, well, that's disappointing that I had that mixed up. But there's still some essence of what I'm saying that applies here. But basically, yeah, the idea is that, so we don't have a problem with Russia there. We don't have a problem with Russia there. And regarding reparations, if we're going to do reparations for World War II, I think it should be representative and non-discriminate and like equal opportunity. So we should start off with whichever country lost the most lives in putting down the Third Reich would get proportionally more, which would be Russia by far.
Yes.
Because Russia lost far more lives than anybody else. And so why are we just jumping down the line and only focused on somebody that's second or third as far as how much they lost?
Well, it's even arguable how much they lost here. But, I mean, you know, Israel has been shamelessly exploiting a very much mythologized history of World War II to extract wealth from the rest of the world. They've certainly got a huge fortune from the American taxpayer. Now they're in this argument with Poland, where they're insisting that Poland accept responsibility for what the Nazis did when Poland was under Nazi occupation. And obviously that's followed with the handout saying, you owe us more money. Because that's what Israel likes to do. And it is utterly ridiculous. All of the events of World War II, whatever actually did or did not happen, those people are all dead. And it is absolutely shameless for Israel to go to countries like the United States or Poland or Germany and say, you owe us money because of what your ancestors did.
Yeah, it's like blaming the victim and blaming the past. And
absolutely.
On a different topic. Yeah, so I wanted to mention, not for you, like you know this, but just for anyone that hasn't thought about this specifically, that it's kind of interesting that the official name of the American system of government, it doesn't actually have the word democracy in it. And it's called a constitutional representative republic. And
yes.
Of course, there's a democratic element to it. That's where the representative comes from. But it's interesting that those other three things are so important that they come even before the word democracy. And the reason it's so important, and I do have a very specific point here, the reason it's so important is because even if you had 99% of the population voting that the blacks have to go to the back of the bus, it's not going to happen, thanks to the protections that a constitution give, that the republic is based on. So it's so important that we're not just going by mob rule, because really, like, if it's just down to the vote, it's mob rule.
Yes.
And it doesn't take into consideration human rights. And so right now we're in the process of ruining all of this, because by allowing our government to break the law of the Constitution and allowing to focus way too much just on the vote, especially allowing illegal voting, what we're doing is we're erasing the first three words, or the only three words that represent the actual rule of law in the country, and we're focusing way too much on the mob rule. So that.
Yeah, and that descent into mob rule, again, that's another symptom of an empire on the verge of collapse. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks for the phone call. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. Now, getting on back to the war zones, here's a good example of why we should not be getting into a war with Russia and China at this point. We've talked about the F-22 and the F-35, both of which have problems. The F-35 more so. The F-22 still is fixating its pilots. And these were supposed to be stealth aircraft that would go out on the vanguard of missions incorporating more conventional aircraft and share all this data from their sensors to tell them what was going on in the airspace ahead. And it turns out that the F-22 and the F-35 were built with communication systems that don't work together. Now, obviously, the radios for the pilots to talk to each other, they work. What is at issue are the data communication systems that share the data generated by the aircraft with forward controllers and each other. And because the F-22 preceded the F-35, it was built with one system, and when the F-35 was being put together, they changed the system. And so these two aircraft can't actually talk to each other without extensive modifications or having to go through a third-party forward controller or an AWACS. And that's another example of how all this money is being spent, and they're really not thinking about making an effective fighting force. It's just, let's make this very expensive plane and sell a whole bunch of them. Now, we have been talking about the latest U.S. aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford, which is the lead ship in the Ford class program. And it's got all kinds of problems with its high-tech radar. It's got problems with its catapults. Apparently, it's hard to control that initial pulse. It can actually damage the tow hook and front landing gear on certain aircraft. And apparently, it's not resilient. When they went out on sea trials and simulated an actual ongoing multi-day flight operations, the catapults kept breaking. And even though they have not solved all of these problems, even though there are people in the Navy who are saying this may never really be combat worthy, the Navy is already moving ahead to block by 2 additional ships. And these are like $13 billion each. And they're just moving ahead to build them. This is going to turn out to be the same debacle that we saw with both the Freedom and Independence class littoral combat ships, which have had all kinds of problems, corrosion problems. Apparently somebody didn't figure out the correct place for the sacrificial zinc anodes, drivetrain problems, and apparently both of these ships were designed to be modular, in that different weapon systems could be dropped in and out to reconfigure the ships quickly for different missions. And I remember Claire and I saw this program about the littoral combat ships on one of the, I think it was Nat Geo or something like, or History Channel, I'm not sure which. But the point being that they were trying to put a positive face about it, what an amazing craft it was, and yet behind, when you stopped listening to the narration, you could see the crew were having all kinds of problems getting any of this stuff to work. And in fact, the final day of the sea trials for this ship, they had to be tied up to the dock because of the drivetrain problems. And they simply swung the gun out, pointed at the horizon, fired at a target raft, and said, "See, it all works." I don't think so. I don't think if you're tied up at the dock, the enemy is going to have the courtesy to sail within the range of your guns. And then later, it came on out that both of those programs are going to be scrapped, and they're going to go back to the drawing board and design a new littoral combat craft. Now, last Sunday, over at the White House, they had their traditional Easter egg hunt, Easter egg roll, and apparently Donald Trump took the opportunity to brag to the children about his huge military spending. And what a good thing that was. All right, let's talk about the economy a little bit. Credit card debt is growing the fastest in 30 years, $1 trillion total with a T, and up to 28% interest from the too big to fail banks. Now, the state-owned banks, a 5% mortgage and credit card abundantly is paying for all the state taxes. That's the difference between privately owned banks and state-owned banks. The state-owned banks are paying the cost of the state. The privately owned banks are making the bankers richer, and very rich. Wolf Richter is saying that the era of the Fed put is over. It now wants lower asset prices, just not too fast. So what he's signaling is we're going to see a slow and gradual stock market decline being engineered to deal with the fact that the market is, in fact, overvalued by a huge margin. The problem with that is, even if it's a slow decline, there's going to come a point where all of a sudden somebody is going to panic, and there's going to be a big sell-off, and then everybody's going to bail at the same time. Now, as you know, the U.S. is still out there throwing sanctions here, sanctions there, sanctions everywhere, and especially in light of the new protectionist tariffs, Russia has stepped forward to say they're ready to take the United States' place as China's primary agricultural supplier. And that means lower costs for China with an added side benefit. China is getting sick and tired of having to constantly test agricultural exports from the United States for GMO contamination and send those shipments back, because it's been happening more and more. Because farms in the United States that think they are growing natural organic agricultural produce have in fact been contaminated by GMO pollen. Story out of Zero Hedge, employees working with corporations to stop corruption and overreach of unions. And companies are trying to weaponize their own employees to try and keep the corruption and price gouging of unions out of their places of business. Well, there's a good way to do that, and that's give your employees decent wages and salaries. That's how Henry Ford kept the unions out of his auto factories. He paid his workers more than the unions were guaranteeing. And unions are a mixed blessing. I agree in an era of management abuse of employees, they need some kind of a protection. But on the other hand, they do tend to be corrupt, and they do tend to be protectionist, and they do tend to stifle innovation. During my career in Hollywood, the unions were the absolute bane of my existence. No matter what I was doing, what was being innovated, what new technologies were being brought on, the unions would come in and say, oh, that's our jurisdiction. Thank you for making it work. You have to go away now. We're going to give it to the uncle of the guy who runs the union or something like that. It really was that corrupt. And according to the Department of Labor reports, there's rampant embezzlement by union employees around the United States of America amounting to nearly $6.5 million every single year. Now, yesterday was the first day of the Oklahoma teacher walkout, and they're basically saying they're not making enough money. And I agree. And that may be one of the reasons why public education in the United States is so poor. The teachers aren't inspired. They're there, it's a job. They're constrained by Common Core, and they're not being paid very well. And I have to wonder, what is the value system of a government that can spend $13 billion on an aircraft carrier that doesn't really work and buy 2 more of the exact same one, but can't pay the teachers a decent wage and salary to make them more effective teachers? I don't understand that. Plus, there's another corruption problem there. Most of the money going into the school districts stays at the top of the school districts. And that's another issue. Now, over in Sweden, they're turning against the push for a cash-free society. And the Swedish people are saying being cash-free puts us at risk of attack. And they're talking about hacking, about being forced to keep their money in the bank, about all the cybercrime going on. And there's the breakdowns. And believe it or not, this happened to me only yesterday when I was out with the lovely Lady Claire. And we went into a fast food place to get something to eat because it was a very busy day. We don't eat a lot of fast food. Every once in a while that we do. We went into the local Arby's. And all over the front of the ordering counter, there were these handwritten notes, cash only, sorry. Because their electronic system that processed credit cards and debit cards and EBT cards and everything else had gone down. And so there were a lot of people who were walking out of that restaurant unable to buy their food. And it happened to us at Safeway Market not that long ago. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you were just talking about unions and, your experience with them as being structurary and corrupt, and they are all of that and more. And I had post-military, I was a HR director for several Fortune 500, companies, and I was involved in union avoidance and union decertification once they already had been elected in. And so I'm very anti-union. I historically have all been my life, but since Citizens United, Mike, I've rethought it. And even though they are absolutely corrupt, and the educational unions and a whole lot of unions are obstructionist, there's only a few institutions that can stand up to corporations.
Yes.
And so I've kind of swung over to unions having greater value than they did before because the corporations are just killing us all. So,
well, that was exactly the point I was trying to make here. They're a necessary evil, and employees do need protections. They need representation to keep their wages and salaries livable, and to stem management abuse. And it's just that in my personal case, like yours, the unions in Hollywood were absolutely my nemesis. And I'll give you just one example of how that came to be. My very first job on a real motion picture, visual effects that is, was Star Trek The Motion Picture. And this was back before computer-generated imagery, when the special effects were done with motion control cameras. And so we were working with these cranes, motorized cranes, stepping motor cranes that we built ourselves, and they were driven by these Apple II computers through these interface cards that were wire wrap cards. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it means you don't go to the store and you buy this stuff and put it together. You are literally, you know, building the cards with wire and everything, and get the interface going. And then they were programmed from the Apple II with this very simple software that would send the numbers to these cards. The cards in turn would drive the stepping motors, and you would get the shot that you wanted. And it was completely repeatable, so you could shoot multiple passes. You could get a glint pass and a glow pass, the ship itself, a holdout mat for the star background. And I worked on this movie for a while, and I qualified for a camera operator's card under what was then called the off-roster project program, meaning that under certain circumstances, production companies could hire non-union personnel for these kind of jobs. Then when it was all over, and I applied to the union, they came back and said, no, you can't have a card, because what the company should have done was hire a union camera operator and teach them how to run that system. And that was the height of absurdity. I mean, you can teach somebody to field strip, clean, and reassemble a Panaflex in an afternoon. But how long does it take to teach somebody how to wire wrap a card, build a crane, wire the stepping motors, and write the software? That's not something that the union camera operators of that day even began to know. And that was the kind of obstructionist attitude that I had to deal with my entire career.
But let me give you an example, another one. My wife, who is a pretty big executive now with the city of Los Angeles, but prior to that, she had been one of the founders of a subset of the SEIU, and was the vice president of the union. And when they founded this, since I had a lot of union and anti-union background, she brought this charter, the union charter, to me to look at, and I'm looking at this thing and I'm going, this isn't a union. And she goes, what are you talking about? She says, you don't have a right to strike. This contract does not give you a right to strike. And now this is a white collar, union made up of city and municipal workers. And they didn't have the right to strike. Like I said, well, this is a pretend union. You guys are making a pretend union. And the point I want to make here also is that a lot of unions are pretend unions. That it used to be that the union makeup in the 70s and the 60s when we grew up were sort of the brawny, blue-collar kind of steelworker type of guys. But now the majority of union members in the United States are these white-collar government workers. Mm-hmm. So big government is big union. At any rate, but they're pretend because a lot of them, they don't even have any real teeth.
Yeah, that unfortunately, as the corporations have gotten larger, they do overshadow the unions. But again, as much as I had problems with unions in Hollywood, they are necessary, or something like them is necessary, in the face of a government that has clearly sided with the corporations against the average worker. Anyway, listen, Peter, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Before we take a few more phone calls, I need to get some stories through here. First of all, apparently on Fox News, one of the interviewers on Fox News about this YouTube shooting was saying that he wished he'd had a gun. And I imagine that's probably a common sentiment right about now. And apparently the Hollywood celebrities, Michael Ian Black, is already out there saying this is all the fault of the NRA. This certainly does appear to have been a lover's quarrel. Now, you remember that caravan that was coming up from Mexico to the United States? And they've released a list of demands that Donald Trump is supposed to comply with. And they're saying, we demand that Mexico and the United States respect our rights as refugees and our right to dignified work to be able to support our families, which sounds really good. The second one is they demand that they open the borders to us because we are as much citizens as the people of the countries where we are and or travel. No, that is absolutely not true. You're citizens of the country that you were born in or you were naturalized in. Now, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Trump is deploying the U.S. military down to the border to basically protect that border. And he's going to keep them there until the border wall is complete. Now, already the liberals are out there screaming it's a violation of posse comitatus. No, it isn't. Posse comitatus says that the U.S. military cannot be deployed against the U.S. citizenry. But we're not talking about U.S. citizenry. We're talking about invaders coming across the border. And the U.S. Justice Department has now decided to impose quotas on the immigration judges because some of the immigration judges are just dragging out the process to delay deportations. And the Department of Justice is saying, no, you've got to do so many every so many days and just clear up that backlog. All right, let's take some phone calls here. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, great show as always. Earlier you were talking about state versus private banks. I think you're kind of proving my point. If there's one sector of this government that the government should control, it's the quantity of money. The government should take over the banks. The government should be issuing the money because the private sector has proven over and over and over again that they don't work for the welfare of the people as it should be. I mean, right now, the banksters run the world. You know that, the oligarchy.
Yes.
And the only way that they're going to maintain power is to create strife, ethnic and racial, and they're doing that. When the government takes over the money, the power will come back to the people. And you won't even be talking about Second Amendment rights so much because a lot of the stress will be relieved. You won't be talking about the Middle East because the Middle East is, you're looking at the world through the lens of the Zionist banking cartel and the Christian Zionists. That's not my world. That's not my world. My world's the Western Hemisphere. My world is the United States. Okay, my world is over here. I don't care about that part of the world. They need agricultural assistance, give it to them. If they need technology, give it to them. But let them live there and let us live here. But we have to take over the banking. And one more thing I want to say is that once the government takes over the banking, unfortunately, Wall Street will collapse because it is elevated by fractional banking. All that money that goes in for the stocks from the super corporations and banks is money they didn't have anyway. They have elevated the stock market. It will collapse. And unfortunately, a lot of good, hardworking people will get hurt, but it has to happen because when they have control of the money, you know, we're down to 4% of the free media. And they're trying to take our human right away of free speech. Michael, they can do it. I mean, they did it in the Bolshevik Russia. They've done it many times in the history of mankind.
Well,
and we have to go after the jugular vein.
All right, well, I agree with shutting down the private central banks because the economy, as it was engineered when this country was founded, served the nation and its people. And private central banking serves the private central bankers. But it's not going to be enough to just shut down the private central bankers. We're also going to have to reimpose those campaign donation limits because the reason those existed was to basically disconnect the moneyed interests from the politicians by holding campaign donations by the ultra wealthy down to the same level as ordinary citizens. and that's what balanced the influence over our Congress. If we close the private central banks, but we still allow the ultra-wealthy to keep plying our members of Congress with vast sums of money, they'll simply come up with another system designed to suck the wealth out of the working people and put it in the pockets of the bankers.
Yes, I think the best thing, the short term you could do, there was a documentary by Bill Stills. He said the government could print U.S. notes, interest-free, and raise the fractional reserve rate to control the quantity of money. And that will start drying up their wealth and power.
Well, the way the economy is being handled now, I mean, it is a very opaque, complex system, and it's done so intentionally so that ordinary people can't really figure it out without a lot of work. In fact, I think it was Henry Ford who said that if the American people understood how our banking system truly works, there'd be a revolution by morning. And I think that was very much the case. We need a simple, elegant system that works for the nation and its people, that is easy to understand, so that ordinary people will immediately know if somebody is trying to game the system or cheat the system, and then they can act accordingly. So, Jeff, I'm going to let you go here because we're running out of time and we got a bunch of callers and I got a bunch of news here. Lenny in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I would like to speak to the comment you made about, and I'm not misspeaking here, the clown Prince Ben Solomon. Okay, he could never move up a notch, in my opinion.
Okay.
Or my opinion in the world, he could never move up. And so I have to respectfully disagree with you. And I know what he said, and he said about Israel having their own land and the Palestinians having their own land. It's easy to say that when one is at a disadvantage. But I don't want to look at what he said. I want to look at what he's done. So we're talking about someone who sponsored the so-called ISIS terrorists by his own admission. These people run around Syria beheading people, robbing people, raping people, killing people. He sponsored all this. In Israel, when they were injured, Israel helped patch them together and then sent them back into the fighting field. All that they couldn't be passed together, I'm sure Israel probably took the organs and sold them on the black market. But he also tortured his own relatives to get money from them. Okay, he's bombing Yemen as we speak.
Yes.
I just don't see any good in this thing that's wrapped up in a facade called a prince. Okay, you can take a piece of crap and wrap Babe Ruth paper around it, but it's still going to smell like a piece of crap, and that's what he is to me.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm a little passionate about that. Okay, one more thing. You were talking to a gentleman named Curtis earlier about the American people waking up, but you started the show off talking about an experiment. And why is it that most people have a follow order functionary type mentality when it comes to authority? Okay, I agree with the study, but where I have a problem is that 85% of the people are going to always be this way. Okay, if you look at dogs, okay, they have what's called a pack-like, custodial pack-like type mentality. 85% of a pack of dogs, if you put them 10 together, 8 of them are going to be followers. Okay, the other 2 are going to be alphas and the leaders. Human beings are no different. So when it comes to the majority of the human beings, they will never wake up. You use what's called a 100 magnetic effect to herd them in the direction you want them to go. That's where the media comes in. But it's the 10 to 15% alphas and leaders that they have a problem with, and that's what they have a problem with Vladimir Putin right now. If you notice, the world leaders, when it came to the scrap-all lie, okay, a lot of them, without even proof, dismissed the Russian ambassadors. Okay, but the strong ones like the Dutertes in Philippines, okay, the ones in Italy, the ones in Serbia, said they're not, the ones in Austria said they're not going to do it. They have to get rid of this type of mentality to bring their so-called New World Order into existence.
Well, let me.
I don't mean to rant on, but I was just a little.
Yeah,
Go
let me
ahead.
step back on here. The whole point of the Stanley Milgram experiment is that prior to that, most people basically were walking around imagining that human beings were of a sort where we would follow lawful authority, because we understand that we have to do that in order to hold society together. But everybody was wondering why the Germans went along with the Nazis and Hitler, even when he started doing all these horrible things. And that was the reason that Stanley Milgram designed his experiment, to get the test subject to inflict pain on a total stranger, just on the say-so of the authority figure. And that was the part that people found really hard to accept. But as you say, yes, it is sadly a part of human nature, because it's what allowed our pre-hominid ancestors to operate together and kill and eat the other pre-hominid ancestors so that we are here and they are not.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed.
All right. Well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and go to Mike in Virginia. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Possible.
I'm having a hard time hearing your phone call. Could
He
you
was
put
going to get us out of NAFTA. It is basically going to disavow NAFTA. And now he's using it as a sort of Damocles over the heads of the Mexican government as a bargaining chip.
Okay.
And, immigration.
We've got a bad phone connection.
Promise of Donald Trump.
We've got a bad phone connection. Can you put your mouth closer to the microphone and try again?
Okay, I'm sorry. I try to keep up with the news as much as possible, but didn't Trump make a campaign promise that he was going to get us out of NAFTA and get rid of it? And now he's using it as a sort of Damocles over the heads of the Mexican government. Is this another false promise of Trump?
Yeah, another in a long line. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump. We did not get the Donald Trump we voted for.
I mean, you know, this is just really disgusting. I know that the Kool-Aid drinker that follows you will find some way to rationalize his behavior. But, I mean, it's just ridiculous, you know. Lock her up, build the wall, get us out of NAFTA, you know. Do you think now that the caravan situation headed towards our border, do you think that's diffused now, or do you think it's just starting?
Well, the caravan, the one that everybody was talking about, apparently has now been broken up by the government of Mexico. But I think the organizers behind it are simply going to try again. But hopefully the presence of the American military on the border might dissuade them from trying. Because Donald Trump is definitely treating these caravans as an invading foreign entity. And well, he should. They're crossing our borders without our permission. That technically amounts to an act of war.
I mean, if he lets this one go, it's never going to end. We're going to be India West.
Well, we're going to be Mexico North.
Yeah, I know. Okay, well, thank you for taking my call, and keep up the great work.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take one more phone call from Laura in Michigan. Aloha, Laura. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to, if Russia was still communist, atheist, the left would be embracing Putin. You know that. Are there any Holocaust museums for the millions of Christians that died because of the Bolshevik communists?
Not
Do you know
that I
of
know
any
of.
Holocaust museums for them?
Nope.
No, there isn't any. That's why nobody knows about them. I have such empathy for those people.
Well,
And
we
so I
should
wanna talk
have.
about-
We should have, but unfortunately, history as it's taught to our children is run through the filter of politics. And right now, Israel dominates American politics, so we're taught the history Israel wants us to believe in, so that we will continue to support Israel financially and militarily, even to the point of sending U.S. soldiers to Israel to die for Israel, like that officer said the other day. Anything else, Laura?
Yeah, did you see in Israel, they took that little 3-year-old, because that 3-year-old was throwing stones at the IDF soldier? Little 3-year-old. That's how tough guys they are. They can't handle a 3-year-old throwing a stone.
What did they do to him?
It just shows you what they are.
What did they do to him?
They took him away from his father, ripped him out of his arms. So I don't know if he ever got him back or what.
Well,
I didn't find out what happened to him.
Not for a long
I
time.
was watching on Russia Today.
Anyway, Laura, thank you for the phone call. We're going to say goodbye here. We're going to close the phone lines. I got a couple of stories I really feel I want to get to before the end of the show. We really ran out of time before I could hit all the talking points. Story that came out of no less than Russia Today, suffocating on condoms and self-immolation. And it's talking about these disastrous internet challenges. And they're talking about the condom challenge, where you literally snort a condom up your nose and pull it out someplace else. The cinnamon challenge, where you take an entire spoonful of ground cinnamon without the aid of a beverage, which can result in gagging, coughing fits, vomiting. If you inhale it into your lungs, can cause pneumonia or collapsed lungs. There's the fire challenge. People are putting accelerants on themselves, lighting themselves on fire, and then hoping they're going to stamp themselves out before they suffer real serious damage. And of course, the Tide Pod challenge, where they eat a Tide Pod. There's a new one, the duct tape challenge, where they duct tape somebody to a chair and dare them to escape. And apparently, one case of the duct tape challenge left a teenager with horrific brain injuries when the chair tipped over and he banged his head against the corner of a window ledge. And I mention this to point out something. These are the same kids who think they should be allowed to determine our national gun policy. So just think about that for a while. And when we come on back for the last segment of our program, a little bit more about the gun control issue. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And as you can imagine, the Twitter storm over gun control is continuing, and it's getting more and more extreme. So I want to read you an actual tweet from an individual named Brian Garvey. And this is a direct quote. NRA types aren't going to give up their guns no matter what laws we pass. These lunatics are not going to comply with gun laws, and they are not going to leave the country. They think it's their country. That means if we want a safe America, we're going to have to kill them all. And since half of all U.S. households have guns in them, this could take a very long time and get very messy. Prohibition won't mean a thing unless we enforce it. That means house-to-house searches. Do you really believe those bullet brains are going to meekly hand over their guns because some meter maid rang the doorbell and asked them nicely? It's going to take no-knock raids by SWAT teams. Since they literally would rather be dead than give up their guns, we'll have to oblige them. I doubt we'll really need to eliminate half the U.S. population to make our streets truly gun-free zones, but if that's what it takes, what are we waiting for? Now, that is the mindset of the gun grabbers, and they think the gun owners are the violent ones. This guy is out there saying, let's kill half the population of the United States of America so we can achieve our gun-free nirvana. And he's basically saying the people who don't like guns, who don't know how to use them, have to kill the people who do have the guns. Or they'll get the SWAT teams to do it for them. They're hired killers who've got the guns. But, I mean, that's how fanatical that they have become. They're just caught up in this whole idea that getting rid of the guns is somehow going to make life a lot better. And no, it won't. It's like that witness to the YouTube shooting on Fox News. He wishes he had a gun. And if he had had a gun, if 10 or 20 of the people there had had guns, and that young lady had known there were armed people there, she might have had time to cool down and not shoot at her boyfriend. You're never going to get rid of all of the guns. You can 3D print guns now. Anybody with the knowledge of woodworking and metalworking and chemistry can build a gun. I know when I was a kid, I did it. I was a big fan of black powder guns, mostly because there's a lot less paperwork involved in those things. And they're cool. They're historical. But if you're in a gun-free zone, even a black powder cap and ball revolver gives you a tremendous advantage. Now, Governor Matt Bevin from Maryland was being asked about gun laws, and he came on out and he said, the problem is the culture. And he said when he was a kid, just like me, you took your guns to school. There were shooting classes at school. They taught gun safety in the school. There were no mass shootings. And I would have liked him to address the link between gun violence and SSRIs, but it is a cultural problem. And I think that's underscored by this other story that was on Fox News about how a mother has been arrested for using a taser to wake up her son to go to school. And that tells you in a nutshell how much our society has deteriorated under liberalism. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to get on out of here and do the Jim Goddard Show next. We'll be back tomorrow with more information. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I know he's got lots of wonderful things to share with you. Please make a point of sharing what you learn here and at whatreallyhappened.com with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.